Hi, I'm Tim Eskew.
And I'm Amanda Stradling. We are East Valley Leader Lab, and this is our podcast, Mind and Body at Work.
Wellness, well-being, and mindfulness are trending right now as organizations try to attract and retain the best talent in this tumultuous post-COVID world. At the Leader Lab, we agree these are important concepts and overdue for being fully utilized in the workplace.
We also believe that these concepts only work when you treat the mind and body as a whole. We are excited to be part of a societal shift in attention toward the whole person. We invite you to join us as we begin to look broadly and deeply at wellness, well-being, and mindfulness in the workplace.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tim Eskew, and this is my partner, Amanda Stradling. We are East Valley Leader Lab, and this is our podcast, Mind and Body at Work. As always, if you enjoy and resonate with the content you hear today, please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever it is you get your podcasts. We are excited today to have another unique perspective on well-being from our very special guest, Heidi Wayment. Welcome, Heidi.
Very nice to be here. Thanks.
So let me tell you a little bit about Heidi. Heidi is a Regents Professor at Northern Arizona University. She earned her PhD in social psychology at UCLA and joined the faculty at NAU in 1996. She's a successful teacher and scholar. She's been named Fellow of the Society of Experimental Social Psychology and the Association of Psychological Science and the Society of Personality and Social Psychology. Heidi has also served in several leadership positions during her time at NAU, 3 non-consecutive terms as department chair, 1 term as associate dean, and last year as interim dean of the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. Lots going on there.
Yeah, it's fun to hear one's history.
Yeah. So, Amanda, why don't you start the conversation?
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have you here, and I just want to get to know your story a little bit. What brought you to this work?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I didn't take a traditional path. I'm 6'2", you might have noticed. But prior to my getting a PhD in psychological sciences and social psychology, I actually, after leaving college, I was one of a handful of American women playing overseas basketball semi-professionally. And then also in the professional league here in the United States prior to the current WNBA. So I had a little bit of a circuitous route to academia, but learned a lot while I was traveling the world playing basketball with a team. It's a great team sport, and just testing myself every day. So when I got closer to the end of that basketball career, which spanned through almost like 20 years.
Wow.
Then went back to school, and I think some of my experiences and life experiences sort of helped me come to some of the things that I initially began to study. So how did I get to this research that I'll talk about today? I really was interested in sort of how people come to have a self-identity, or what are some of the processes involved in who we think we are, and how we become who we are, and also how we cope with loss and other kinds of stressful life events. So I lost a twin sister a few days after we were born. I lost my father when I was young, 14 years old. And so those were also some pretty significant events in my life that shaped my worldview, I think, and shaped who I became as a psychologist.
Yeah. Our history is always such a big part of what we become.
Yeah. So, it's a little bit, I don't know. And then came to Arizona to Flagstaff, and basically my first full-time academic job, and I've been there ever since.
Wow. Has Flagstaff been a pretty good home base for you?
Yeah, I really love it. I mean, I've traveled around the world, and the thing that really attracted me, it's so funny, over my life, people at several different points in time would say, "Oh, you would love Flagstaff." And I would say, "Where is it?" And I, when they say Arizona, I go, "Oh, no, that's too hot." And then they go, No, Flagstaff is different." And so I got the same response multiple times. And then when I saw the job opening, I applied. I go, well, I guess I should apply. And I really love the 4 seasons and the small town aspect of it. But it's nice being in Phoenix too. A lot of us in Flagstaff relish the opportunity to come down to and to all the things that Phoenix and Sedona and other parts of Arizona offer.
Well, and those of us in the Valley relish going up in the summertime in
Right.
particular to Flagstaff, where it's
Definitely.
nice and cool in the summer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about why your research resonates so much with you personally? And in the Leader Lab, we always talk about your personal care, kind of your deepest held values. How does this connect with that?
Right. So maybe I should just say a little bit where my research has come to. There's this. It's the my colleague and I, Jack Bauer, and way back in 2005, had a conference because we were really interested in sort of understanding the less defended self. I had done some research after 9/11, and in a nutshell, looking at responses and predictors of reactions to that loss, to that collective loss, and we found. Predictably, on some level, that people were distressed and different types of distress, but the kind of distress that brought people together was associated with identifying and feeling similar to the victims. And so it was a little bit different in the sense that it seemed clear that having a compassionate, an identity that allowed for identification with others was sometimes painful, because we are then together with others and we feel part of a collective. But that was ultimately a response that also allowed for growth and just for feeling connected. So it was this interesting kind of juxtaposition of emotion and action. And so we thought about that and said, well, what does it mean to sort of be at that intersection of taking care and protecting the self, but also caring about and wanting to protect others? And we sort of, humorously or not so humorously quipped, like, does it take a national tragedy for people to get to that space? And that's where we came up with, looking at all the different literatures in social psychology and developmental psychology and human development, the quiet ego, an ego that is not a deflated or absent ego, an identity that is strong and value-oriented, but that also is motivated to care for the self and others, care for the self's growth and others' growth. And sort of that, then it turns out, of course, this is not a new idea in social or developmental psychology. This is one of the oldest ideas that has been echoed by many spiritual and religious traditions. But in our field, it was novel in the sense that we set out to measure it with a brief scale, and also included it in studies where people care about, does this type of stance, does this type of self-identity, although it may not be able to be actualized all the time and we're never perfect people, but can that help us with our relationships? Can that help us with how we cope with unexpected events? Can that help us with workplace relationships? And so far, the literature has really been accumulating, not only in our own lab, but people around the country and around the world have been using this idea and incorporating it. And it seems to be, that there's something there about taking stock of our motivation with respect to ourself and others. And so that's the research I'm involved in now.
It's interesting that, part of the discovery was post-catastrophe. It suggests that we all have this capacity, or a lot of us have this capacity, right?
Right.
As human beings, but we don't, on a general day-to-day basis, right? If everything's going well, it doesn't come forward.
Yeah, I think it's what it really is. We when we talk about this research, we acknowledge people have been writing about these ideas in different ways for many years. So I like to say, this is not a new idea, but one approach that maybe we're contributing to is that we do have that capacity. We know what those values are and that we forget them. And so part of where we've moved along in our research is just doing studies where we remind people briefly of 4 components of a quiet ego. Help them, maybe even put them in their own words. It's not a long thing because we know people know these things, but they forget. And our society kind of pulls for behaviors and attitudes that I would say could be characterized sometimes as highly egotistical. But people aren't happy in that state either. So our research has moved more into the idea of sort of saying, hey, this is the stance, this is the balance of self and other. And here's some cues you can remember. And when you do, it sort of interrupts that cycle of, it's not only egotistical thinking. I wouldn't even say that's the biggest threat. It's the self-focus of saying, why me? Why is that happening to me? That's not fair. And we have this great ability to just, if we want to, get in our heads of, we can just make ourselves miserable by coming up with all kinds of things. So
we work with our clients around that at the Leader Lab in regards to emotions and moods, right? And emotions are somewhat involuntary. Something happens to us that can trigger an emotion, but we have a choice about the mood. And so, what you were describing, going into your head and saying, why me, produces a mood, which produces a predisposition to certain types of not necessarily productive action.
Right, and we do it all the time. And so sometimes I refer to our intervention as like a psychological neosporin, You just, you get in that moment and one can teach oneself to interrupt those thoughts. And so we do it with these 4 ideas, but there are many, many ways that people use in their everyday lives to keep themselves on track, pursuing the meaning and the value that they care about in life.
Yeah. Anything before I move into the next?
In your research, do you find that in difficult times, the majority of people turn toward this more quiet ego way of being, that they reach out and connect? Does everyone?
Yep.
You mentioned everyone has the capacity and that we know it. How many people have you found are using it?
Well, a lot of times in research, we're looking at group averages, but I can say that when we've looked at different populations, we're using our scale. One big, we know what sort of the average, the mean response is in a group using our scale. It's a 5-point scale. The average tends to be around 3.5, but I recall we did a study right after a shooting that occurred on campus at NEU several years ago.
Yeah,
there were lots of students nearby. It was, I think, a Friday night, and so it was a really sad event, and lots of students were traumatized, not only maybe by being in the area, but by knowing people who knew people, or who could say, "Wow, that's the kind of party I typically go to." So they could really relate to the students. And in that sample, we measured some of their thoughts and feelings literally within days of it, and the average response on that scale was almost a half a point higher. So I think that was some evidence that in the throes of something like that, I think it's pretty well known that a lot of tragedies can make people reevaluate things, but if, just like anything, not everyone. I would say no, not everyone would react that way, but some people definitely do. So we've seen it a little bit in some forms of our data.
I think it's really interesting that you have such specific numbers on that.
Yeah,
that's really neat.
Yeah, well, so one of the things I brought these along. This is an example of a cue card that we might give to our study participants. It talks about the 4 quiet ego characteristics, which are awareness, belonging, compassion, and development. These are just sort of keywords. And then on the back, it has a little paragraph of what quiets the ego. I don't know if I have time to read these little snippets here. Just
sure, I think our listeners would want to have an idea.
So people put this in their wallet, or they put it on a mirror, they say, or they have it nearby. In some cases, some people say, "Oh, I just imagine this green-blue card." They don't even have to look at the words anymore. But what quiets the ego is the first idea is awareness, without judgment of the self and others. This sounds like mindfulness. It's a lot like the idea of mindfulness, of trying to be open-minded, in conversations or in settings. I know you're interested in workplace things, so I could imagine in one that would be sort of like trying to come into a situation without any preconceived ideas. It's a little tough sometimes. But what's also key to this idea is to be aware even after the fact, kind of following an idea that I first read about by the Stoics, that to review your day in a way, to sort of say, well, how did that go? Or was I not thinking of something? Or maybe I didn't see something the way the other person saw it. So awareness of situations, awareness of self. And so the little cue on the other side is be here now in the present moment without judging yourself or others. Be open-minded. So that's kind of just a quick version of, lots of research that you could talk about this idea of the importance of awareness. The second idea is we call belonging. We're connected to others and the natural world. The idea that we are all interconnected. We're interdependent. Again, there's so much research out there, and so on our card we just say, think about what it means to be human. What you share with all living things. Remember that we're all interconnected. And again, just sometimes when we get off on our negative mindset, why me? Well, that's disconnected. Okay. Third one is sometimes it's a C word because we like to do A, B, C, D. At one point we called it compassion. At one point, and I think now we're calling it curiosity more. But it's the idea of seeing other perspectives, being open. And to other ideas and just understanding other people's perspectives, being open-hearted. And that's basically what that says on the other side of the card. Be open-hearted, give others the benefit of the doubt. So that's a cue. And then the last one is, we call growth-mindedness. Here we say development. Learn from your past mistakes, become a more balanced person. And here in our little bit more text, live a valuable and meaningful life. Strive to grow and learn from your successes and your mistakes. So this is what we give people after we give more detail. And some of our work suggests that just a quick reminder like that can help people interrupt the kinds of thoughts that can set them on a path.
ABCD.
Yeah,
right?
ABCD,
yeah,
right.
That's great.
Yeah, I was just going to say awareness is operating on a couple levels there, right? So if they think to look at the card, they're going to get a reminder about being aware of their surroundings, being aware of who they're with. But you have to be aware to remember to look at the card, right? So, I'm guessing you're sort of the card acts to kind of engender some habit of going to these things and keeping these things mindful on a regular basis.
And there's, like I said, there's so many ways people do this already. I mean, some people, I think a popular method for a lot of people is meditation. And these are the kinds of thoughts and self-statements people make. Other people find their solace and their resetting in exercise and running and being in the forest or being in a beautiful place. The reason we created this is we thought in the workplace or in a stressful situation, people don't have time to say, wait a minute, I'll be back in an hour.
Yeah.
That maybe they can do something where they just try to reset. And I think it's hard sometimes, even in this situation, when someone is maybe in the middle of making some less than optimal things. It's really important after the fact to be able to say, wow, I could have thought about that a little differently, and come back to the people. And so it's not over. Yeah. I think, social psychologists spend a lot of time talking about all the ways in which we justify past behavior. Like once we do something or say something, we're fairly motivated by just how our brains work is to justify why that was the right thing to do. It's very hard for people to say, I was wrong. I'm sorry, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's an attempt to try to undo that a little bit. That's very natural. And this is one thing we stress is that a lot of the things that lead us down a path of less than optimal behavior and thoughts are really these automatic processes that are there to make our world more predictable and easier to handle. And so it's not the fault of the individual per se. It's really how we're wired.
Yeah, and this has come up a number of times in our conversations. How we have that capacity there, but to get that interruption, to remind yourself to become aware, to use it, and we'll get in. We have some techniques for helping people do that as well, but I think we'll get into that a little later.
Yeah.
I want to find out. So I know as a social scientist, you probably use students as subjects part of the time, a lot of the time. Have you had an opportunity to take any of these experiments out into the workplace? A lot of our listeners are working in organizations and figuring out how to apply these things there.
Yeah. Well, we've done, I'd say, in two venues. Several years ago, we were able to work with some employees at our local hospital. And that was really a rewarding experience, and we found some benefit, some evidence of reminders. We took a little card like that. We had it was like a workshop, 4 sessions where we talked about these ideas. Employees got to talk with one another. We had specific kinds of, little exercises to do, and trying to focus in on maybe a time in their either their work life or personal life where they know there's a point. There's always this kind of situation where I seem maybe not to react. I gave a lot of personal examples at the time. And we actually, how medical personnel wear they have a lanyard usually with all the stuff. And so we actually made a horizontal version of this and
perfect.
stuck it in a thing so they could also have that with them. So they found some nice results with respect to over an 8-week period of a little bit higher scores on emotional regulation, of being able to manage emotions, a little bit lower compassion fatigue, which is something that, when you're always working to serve others, compassion fatigue is there. So that was lowered a little bit. So perhaps reminding themselves of these cues help them refresh the empathy that we know they have. That's why they go into that line of work. And there was one other, but I'm forgetting what the other outcome was. We also have done this. We've applied. We're in the middle of this study, but we're working. We've taken these ideas and created a phone app, and we're working with the Army.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, so we're working with soldiers and hopefully trying to do this in a way where they can use these ideas to reach. They're very close to the Army values as well, and trying to show that alignment and provide a way to, again, have a brief reminder just to reset perhaps the person's way of thinking in the moment. We know that the Army life is not easy sometimes. And so we thought that would be, my colleague and I are working on that research. So that's a big organizational structure. So.
Are they, I don't know how much you can say about it, but I mean, are they using it in like their exercises when they're, simulating battle and things like that? Is expected to be used in combat or more just day to day?
Just first of all, with the way that kind of research works, it has to be done during their off-duty time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's just hopefully again giving them a set of tools, and in this case, we're trying to help them create their own type of cue that's meaningful for them once they understand the topic. And we do it with photos instead of the written word, and so we're just testing that right now to see if using those reminders can show evidence. And I mean, I really do believe, and I know it in my own personal life, if I can interrupt those thoughts that get me down that spiral, it makes a world of difference just in terms of how it affects my motivation, or it affects my willingness to keep going, or different things. So it's about interrupting that and getting out of that negative, defensive, understandably sometimes, because, like I said, I don't want to make defensiveness sound like a terrible thing. It's so natural. We all do it.
Yes.
But we don't want to stay there that long. I guess that's my point.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're protecting yourself, you're not necessarily looking out for where are we going together.
Right. But we need to protect ourselves too. That's why we talk about balance, Okay. And so you can see there's lots of examples of, I think when people hear, well, I can't be that, I can't turn the other cheek. I can't be, I'll be weak. People take advantage of me. A quiet ego is also a strong and capable self, one that also works to develop their skills. And it's with the idea that one has skills that one can do those other things. So it's a strong sense of self too.
And go ahead.
I was going to say, We sometimes use symbols in our classes as well. We use the symbol for warrior. It's the Chinese symbol. And it sounds a lot like what you're describing. So you have the earth, this shared space, and you have this axe that symbolizes harm or kind of anything that would...
A threat.
Yeah, any threat. And there are two people. There's the one that's just standing there, and then one that's rising up a little bit off of the earth line with their arms outstretched. And I think that shows obviously compassion and connection to the other person that is behind, that they're caring for and protecting, but also that balance of self, right? They're protecting themselves as well.
It's perfect, I think we're in total sync on the meaning of that, Yeah,
I like that symbol a lot. That's one that comes to my mind.
Right. Yeah, and that's great. And I think for some people, that type of visualization is exactly what we're trying to do with this research. How can you just think of something, or maybe someone has a medallion in their pocket and they grab that, or someone might have a religious belief that they can grab onto. But all these things can serve that kind of purpose.
So much, I think. And so this is becoming more mainstream in organizations, whether you call it quiet ego or mindfulness. And so much of it is about, like you say, the interruption. And what are techniques that we can use to, bring that present, to have that present.
Right.
We say become centered. It's such a...
Right.
I mean, that's kind of the essence of it, right?
Yeah.
Is interrupting and going to that...
Right.
to that non-protective place.
Yeah, and I think so. Like I can say this about our study. We call our app Direction Check. It's the idea of where are you, and what your values are. Where do you really want to be headed? And so this is also a way to sort of check where you are, check where your head is at, check where your heart's at.
And so you mentioned the balance, because you could take this too far, right? If you're not at all protective, bad things can happen.
Yep.
Right. Warriors are protective in a way as well.
Right.
So that makes me think of our culture. What do you have you looked at different cultures at all to see, if some are more likely to be able to do this on a regular basis?
Yeah, it's funny. Early on we looked at some of these ideas in a sample of highly practiced Buddhist practitioners. And of course, these ideas these are very common in that group. In the intervening years, so that's very different than college students, and it was like, well, of course, it's going to say. But this scale that we've developed has been translated into Turkish, Chinese, Italian. I know there's research being done in those cultures where they've taken it, and it's I'm just sort of amazed that they're finding the same types of results. I think that what I would expect culturally is that some cultures that are more collective, it might be that the materials to bring people back into balance might be, and this is untested, but it might be that you do need to take care of yourself, that the self is important, that the skills that you have, the strengths that you have, that those are important. So I could imagine in different cultures there might be a need to change the words slightly, or to make the ideas more resonant with the culture and with the values of that culture. But ultimately, balance is balance. But I haven't tested that directly. But we've seen very similar. I think there was one situation, a correspondent with a researcher in Turkey. I think one of the items of our scale didn't quite map onto the other 13 items. There's 14 items. And so that might have been a cultural difference just in the way that was worded or something like that.
I think there might be differences culturally, but also I would guess in times of life. Maybe there's times of life where people, because of what's going on, that balance is off. Maybe they've been taking care of others more and too much, and they need to swing it back that way.
Yeah.
Or, different times of life.
Situationally, right? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And I think you're exactly right. I think it's an ongoing dynamic thing, and we might, what we look at like at noon is different than what we looked like in the morning or at 5 p.m.
true.
Right? Yeah.
So in a culture like, I think this comes from our Western culture in general, and then it seems to peak in corporate organizations. It's a very ego-forward, right? The leadership is expected to be ego-forward. Do you get any pushback when when you've taken this into different environments? Have they said, no, we don't want to quiet our egos?
I haven't had that type of applied experience like you do, working with actual folks. I would love, it would be wonderful to have the opportunity sometime. I know that a lot of academics are writing books on leadership. The title of Low Ego, No Ego, egoless leadership. There's all these kinds of ideas out there, really very much so in the last several years. I can imagine there would be an initial fear that somehow that people will only respect me if I'm right and if I share this vision that they can then come join. I mean, I do think leadership does have to have, people in leadership do have to have a vision. They need to be able to communicate well. They need to articulate an energy and enthusiasm, but those ideas have to be culled from the people as well. So there are strong leadership skills, but they don't have to be, solely the ideas of the people. So I do think that could be threatening to leaders until they realize, and they've probably, I really believe a lot of great leaders have done these things naturally over time. That's probably what makes them. There's all these great quotes out there that, being a true leader is like people think they did it themselves. If you're really good at being a leader, people will sort of not see you as being a leader because they'll feel so empowered. But I have a great example, I think, from something I just read the other day, and I was thinking about coming and talking about this. Now, you guys, I may be way behind the curve, and this is well known already, but I thought, wow, this is a great example of a thing. So everyone knows about the compliment sandwich thing idea?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Give people, if you have to tell them something, give them some correction at work. You start out with a compliment, do the corrective thing, and then end with a compliment. So Adam Grant, who is a very well-known organizational psychologist, he's written a lot of books, and he just published something a couple of days on his Substack. And he talked about how dumb that is in a way, because everyone knows the other shoe's about to drop. It feels disingenuous and all those things.
It's unclear.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Mixed message.
So he gave this 4-step thing, which to me, I read it and I go, that's a quiet ego approach to giving feedback. So it was first, again, this is Adam Grant. Explain why you're giving feedback. So, for example, a line could be, I'm giving you these comments because I have high expectations and I know you can reach them. So you've demonstrated that you have their back, you want the best for them, and you believe in their potential. And then the second piece is taking yourself off the pedestal. So in other words, instead of having this relationship, sort of saying, I've benefited from feedback before, or I understand, and just doing something to basically sending the message, I'm not perfect either, and I learn, and I'm trying to get better, growth-mindedness,
Yes.
learning from my mistakes. The third thing is ask if they would like feedback. I noticed a couple of things and wondered if you're interested in some feedback. And so the ownership, he wrote in his blog that, he's done this. He does evidently do a lot of consulting, and no one's ever said no to wanting feedback. And by the person saying yes, that reduces defensiveness because they just asked they said, yes, I'm willing. And the last part, and again, this is really what struck me as being very aligned with what we're talking about today. It says, have a transparent dialogue, not a manipulative dialogue. So, for example, I want to start by describing what I saw and see if you saw the same things. Then we can decide what, if anything, we need to do going forward. I'm open to the possibility that I may be missing things or that I contributed to the concerns I'm raising. How does that work for you? That, to me, it's growth-mindedness, it's perspective-taking, it's awareness, and it's interdependence. How can we do this together? So I thought it was a great example of something in the workplace that would reflect good leadership, but also in what we're talking about.
Yeah, and it's usable. People can start using that right away.
Right. Yeah. So that was, if people are interested, that's something to look at. I think it's really interesting.
Great. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So our podcast is all about well-being, you know. What do you see the connection between the quiet ego and overall well-being being? Like, what is the connection?
Well, we have a lot of research that suggests, that people who, even the scale score is associated with a lot of different types of well-being. And in some of our research showing that it can, strengthen emotional regulation. We have some research that shows it can actually slow down stress reactivity in the body as measured by my colleagues who are the physiological things. So we've looked at isoprostane levels in the urine, which are indicative of stress, and have things like. So we see physiological benefit over time, and of course self-report benefit, and and that's hard because self-report. There's all kinds of criticism about self-report measures. So we just finished up a study just this last semester where gave college students, again, quick reminders of those cues that I mentioned. And then they did a computerized task of, I don't know if you're familiar, but it's called the IAT. It's also a computerized task of sort of implicit association, which gets criticized in other contexts. But in my context, I was using it for valuing self and other, and saw exactly what I was predicting, which is a brief reminder of those cues was associated with a clear reduction in favoring the self over others. Now, that may only be lasting a couple minutes. I don't know. But I think there's some suggestion there that there could be some benefit. And then some other studies we have that we think are related to the workplace. We've done it twice where we've shown that a brief reminder, again, just thinking about those cues, actually increases cognitive focus on another time task and executive functioning skills. So that could be, and I think if you think of a worker who's ruminating or upset, we know that takes away from
definitely
how they're doing. And so we have some experimental evidence too that shows that this can interrupt the kinds of things that interfere with our cognition. So
yeah, it's really refreshing to hear, some empirical evidence because, we're playing with a lot of these concepts and teaching people, for example, how to relax under pressure, and we focus a lot on the body, the somatic aspects of it. So we practice relaxing under pressure in a physical way, and then tie it back to the work situations. Yeah. But all of our results are self-reported. Sometimes they're, situationally self-reported. So I went and I did this thing and I got a different result this time.
Yeah.
Which is great. But the urine samples add some credibility.
Right. And this implicit association test, it's a quick thing, and it just measures, you have positive and negative words associated with self and other. And it was just wonderful to see that basically all this means, I think, is that if we want to, we can just sort of reset the clock and remember, because I have yet to meet someone who doesn't value the well-being of others. So it's just reminding ourselves of that, and for our own self too. So
yeah, I think humans are innately social.
Yeah.
And we know that our well-being, our individual well-being, is tied to the well-being of others.
Exactly.
And the organization.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so we just forget it, right? And so I think that's So I think it is very much tied to well-being. This type of thing, but also all the other things that we I know you guys are interested in physical thing, and I've, like I said, I've been I think walking and getting out and moving the body is so important for our well-being. But I also like to recommend things to, especially to students who, that's mostly who I interact with. They're on their phones all the time, and they're doing a lot of things that I would think is a little bit counterproductive to their well-being right now if they get into a lifelong habit of not being active and so forth. But I like to also talk about it in terms of making things with your own two hands. And I did a study a few years ago asking students, like, well, what do they do? What kind of hobbies do they have? And this was several years ago. I don't even know what I'd find today because so much more time is being taken up with screen time. But baking, making, gardening.
Oh.
I think sometimes young men or young women are at a disadvantage who are interested in mechanical things because you can't even get in underneath the hood of a car anymore. I know when I was growing up, my brother was always tinkering with the carburetors in the cars and fixing things. And there's a sense of, I don't know, there's just a sense of efficacy to be able to, follow a recipe, bake cookies for your friends or make soup for your neighbor or something like that. So I think that's also key to well-being, and that's also physical.
Yeah.
Yeah, creating and the body.
Creating, yeah.
So it's a mind-body connection there, and you're also involving a lot of senses, right? With the taste.
Yes, and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I like to recommend that too as a way to get out of one's own head a little bit. Of just do something, create something.
What's coming up for me at my stage in life is we know a lot of people that are retired, and talk to those people on a regular basis. These are the things that retired people do. But, it's a shame we have to wait our whole career, right? And be worked up all the time and then save it all up, for the end of life.
We know that's a bad
again.
idea, right? I mean, because some people get to that and then they don't even have the time to do what they think they do. So, and I think a lot of people, that was one of the fun things about this workshop. And when I've talked about these ideas, especially even the making things with your own two hands, people do. And it really ties back to their identity. I'm a person who can do this, whether it again, I'm probably missing some people like to write, journal, work in the garden. Cooking always comes to mind for me because I love to bake and cook. Quilting, making things for other people, that kind of satisfies all of it too, or including other people, working together. These are things that I think, especially today, you mentioned our culture today, I think with the computers and the phones, this is, our parents and grandparents did these things all the time. So it'd be nice to help students and younger generation become more acquainted with the joys of all that kind of creativity.
Speaking of age, do you think there's an element of maturity? Do we develop a quieter ego as we grow and age?
I get that question a lot, and I just wanted to kind of bring up another thing that I was reading the other day. No, I think the answer is no. I think that people don't necessarily always mature into wiser, quieter ego people. I think there's a chance. I think a lot of I'm not a developmental psychologist, but age is not the biggest predictor of wisdom in older age. And I think
darn it.
I know.
I was hoping that was going to be my ace up my sleeve.
I think there's obviously the opportunity because a person's learned a lot over time and they have the opportunity, but the features of wisdom again are highly aligned with the ideas that we're talking about today. But not everybody is just willing to sort of to use it in that way. I guess I'll just leave it there. I think there's a possibility, but I don't think it's a given.
It goes back to the D on your card, development, having a developmental, like a growth mindset.
Right.
And if you're not, for whatever reason, if you're staying tight and committed to not changing, then every opportunity probably can cement you in deeper.
Could feel more like a threat, and also just there's a lot of challenges with aging. Knock on wood, right? And so I could imagine, even if I'm being honest with myself, I can imagine when something terrible happens, it's always a matter of, where none of us are immune for negative events and for ourselves or others, is knowing that why me is going to be right there as a possibility, as a response, versus trying to take the higher road. So
Yeah.
I do think for some people, end of life or the last quarter is maybe not what they'd envisioned, and they could become upset and bitter
Yeah.
and defensive about it too. So, at any rate, I would like to think too that age would help people, but you see people who are young who are very evolved and mature,
Yeah.
and you see some folks that are older that are not. So,
And there's a very common element there that I was just reminding myself of, because I discovered it. We have blind spots, right? And so if you're blind to the fact that you've maybe got an overpowering ego, it's going to take something. It's going to take a jolt,
right.
It's not just going to be a few people telling you, you could take it down a couple notches. It's going to take something significant
Right.
to open you up to the possibility of looking at things another way.
Yeah, and that's exciting. This researchers in Austria, Gluck and al. Have this. They've been researching wisdom for a long time, and two of their basic premises about wisdom and how do people become more wise over time is that crises and obstacles that challenge worldviews and broaden perspectives. That's what's essential for growth. That would be associated with wisdom, and so aging should bring those opportunities along in other parts of life, but they also have a model which they call MORE, M-O-R-E, and it's very similar to what we're talking about. So I just want to sort of give a shout out to that research as well. They see the resources that you need to develop wisdom, and so I'll just want to read those out really quickly because you'll see the overlap. Managing uncertainty and uncontrollability. So being able to tolerate uncertainty, being able to be okay with not knowing, intellectual humility, being open to new experiences, and having tolerance for other people's goals and values, and their reflectivity, reflecting with the intention of gaining insight and learning more about the self and life. They're using different words, but I see it all here. And the last one, E, emotional sensitivity and regulation, sensitivity to one's own and other feelings, regulation of one's own and reactions to other feelings. So they say that's wisdom, and that's a psychological resource, but they also really bound that in some ways to the idea that it comes through adversity. So that's a slight, I guess I think that probably applies to all of what we're talking about, because we do always meet with adversity and unexpected events, whether as in our work lives, in our personal lives, in our internal lives, So
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, it's another more evidence, and that's what I mean by these are not new ideas. These ideas are out there. But it is neat to see the research going in this direction to sort of provide some evidence that, these kinds of reminders and interventions can be very helpful, and in the workplace.
I was reminded of a reminder my original martial art teacher used to use when he used to see us shifting into that victim mindset, he would say, or the why me. Mm-hmm. He would do this. Like a little physical cue. Why me? Yeah. And then he would just remind us to bring our hands down, keep them open and ready to act and move forward. Yeah. So just sometimes when I hear myself complaining and pitying myself, I think of him making fun of me and doing this. Yeah. And then I just relax and get ready.
But this is great, right? Because it's also strength, right? It's a position of strength to be balanced like that. And it's neat. I love it.
We are approaching
wrapping up.
our time limit. Anything we haven't covered you really wanted to share about the quiet ego or other parts of your research?
Yeah, I think just I think my sort of approach when I've always heard these things over time, that sometimes I feel like, oh, I'm just not good enough if I don't do these things, or, you're asking so much of me to think this way, or, and I just think that it's just really important for us to have self-compassion, to realize that we're not perfect and that we just keep striving to do the best we can. I remember, you may have read this book, The Four Agreements. Are you familiar?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's the last one, is to do the best we can, right? Not take things personally, keep, our word matters. Forget the third one. And the fourth one is do the best we can. And I think that's the message that that I would like to end with, is that none of us are perfect, but if we have the motivation to try to be better, I think that's important.
That's wonderful. I love what you said earlier, that such a compassionate thing to do for yourself is remind yourself that you can circle back. If you reflect and you didn't like how you showed up, you can come back to that. So that's something I'm going to incorporate after this conversation.
I thanks for saying that. I think that's key too. In my leadership experience, it's hard to be in charge of a lot of people, and we do make mistakes. And the ability to say, I was wrong about that. I didn't. Now, if a person did this 24/7, people might lose faith. But when it's important, when we make a mistake, and I found that it's really been effective, because it's like Adam Grant said, it sort of levels that playing field for a little while. And I think in a workplace setting, I think these ideas can be very fruitful, but we're not losing sight of the fact that you have real goals, and success is the key. And of course it is. So it's not a watering down of will. It's just a way of trying to get the best from everyone and be happy while we're doing it.
Yeah, and it's not always, I did something wrong. Sometimes it's just, I left out something important in that conversation.
Yeah.
Circling back creates all kinds of opportunities.
Yeah. So, well, thanks again for the opportunity to talk with you today. It's really nice. Learned a lot myself.
Great.
So glad you could be here.
Yeah. Where can our listeners learn more about your work and your quiet ego?
Well, Googling the quiet ego pretty much brings up a lot of different things. So there's several blogs. There was just a recent blog, I think it's in Forbes magazine, that was really
neat.
Nice. Just the last day of 2023, and it was really nice to read. And this blog post even shared some studies that I wasn't familiar with, of other people using this, one in the workplace. In fact, there was a study about workplace and increasing empathy and ability to communicate with supervisors. So there's
that
a blog.
Like a great blog.
If you have the link to that, send it to us and we'll put it in the notes so our listeners
that would
can
be good.
find it.
That gives a nice overview.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about this?
And this book is in press. It's been a while, but this is through AP Books, Transcending Self-Interest, and it's a collection of chapters written by a lot of different psychologists on ideas related to the quiet and the noisy ego, and how
Both
that
sides.
works with in relationships, with wisdom. There's a chapter on wisdom, and it kind of covers the gamut of different psychological areas in psychological sciences, and how a quiet ego. And like I said, this research has been going on for a long time, may not have that particular name, but this idea of how to be less offended toward the self and others. So,
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here, Heidi.
all right. Well, thank you.
You
I
shared
really
a lot of
appreciate it.
wisdom. And thank you to our listeners. We're so happy to have had you here today. This has been Mind and Body at Work with East Valley Leader Lab. Check out our leadership courses at evleaderlab.com. And like we said at the beginning, if this content resonates with you and your cares, please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and wherever else you get your podcasts. Be well and keep moving.